Hey, hang on. Okay, he's heavy. Okay. Wait, I'll get his legs over. Come on. We need a blanket. He's pretty dry. Take the pants off. He's scared. He's scared of that. Are you gonna lock it? Yeah, Mama? Okay, I got to. Mama! Here, take him. I gotta go get his mom. She just collapsed. Okay. Baby is okay, baby. Baby is okay. Okay. مرة كيف بدهم يعني مرة. يا. It's very. Here, let's go over here by the car.
To stop helping people the way they should be helped, then you are losing humanity.
Sono scappato e ho uscito di questo campo qua che è libero vicino al mare.
Many people were unaware, telling us all the time that whatever they saw on television, here the reality was totally different. We come here to try to help in this humanitarian crisis.
My human feeling is telling me if you fall down, I will give you my hand to help you to lift up.
If we don't find managed solutions that are based on solidarity and responsibility sharing, then we'll only suffer, and we kind of neglect our core beliefs.
We can leave tomorrow.
Sure.
We can leave in an hour. It doesn't matter. So it's up to us. It's only up to us, but they have no choice.
There's so many times in your life that you feel like you can't make a difference because you're not in that situation. Well, you come down and you realise actually, man, we are actually all in this together.
Everybody like to laugh, to dance, to sing.
And every dream, hope and desire is just a flicker
We joke in our office with our team that every day on Lesbos is like dog years. It's worth 7 days. There's so many things that happen in a single day here that you lose track of time.
What's called the refugee crisis, I think, should really be regarded as a moral crisis in the West.
When you look at the political realities, there's no point making a value judgment about whether the politics is good or politics is bad. Politics just is. And you need to understand its dynamics so you can use those. Now, if you don't have resources, you can't do anything. If you do have resources, you can. And that can be really, really frustrating. You can sit there and literally watch people die that you could have kept alive if the right resources came in, but if you don't have the resources, there's nothing you can do.
The wall that's being discussed will cost about £2 million. It costs, and you can check the figures, around about £23,000 per year minimum. That's just the basic cost to look after every single refugee and asylum seeker. So, you know, the cost of this wall is infinitesimal compared to, you know, it's less than the cost of dealing with 100 people who arrive illegally on the backs of lorries. So, but of course, everyone watching this is immediately going to say, well, it shouldn't be about costs. So let's be clear, you've raised the cost point, and I'm just answering it a straightforward way. We're not trying to build a fortress Europe. You can either have it two ways. You can either say, right, we'll have a completely open borders, as some people, no doubt many watching this, want. That's fine. If you want that, argue for it. I know some people do, but just understand that millions and millions of people, tens of millions of people, hundreds of millions of people throughout the world will want to come to Western European countries because the standard of living is so much better. And it's not something the majority of people in this country want. But if you want that, then you have to understand what the consequences will be. It will be a drastic fall in the standard of living, the end of the NHS and all social benefits, because we won't be able to afford it anymore. And it'll also mean huge cultural changes.
Or the exorbitant profits made by bankers in the City of London, or why not the corporations and wealthy people who are using tax havens that England is running around the world. It's one of the main centers for creating tax havens that corporations and the wealthy can use to escape the burden of taxation in their own countries. So why not close those down? There are a lot of them under British jurisdiction. The idea that conservative is talking about a threat to the NHS is beyond irony, because they're trying to destroy it.
Well, I don't recognise that figure of 24,000. So the Syrian resettlement programme, the Home Office funds 3,000 per person for local authorities to do the resettlement. So I don't know where that figure of 24,000 has come from, but what David Davies isn't taking into account is the economic contribution that refugees make. So if they're allowed to work, or when they're granted asylum and they're allowed to work, they then do a job, they contribute their skills, they pay taxes. When they go to the shops, they're paying other taxes. You know, they contribute to the economy. And he's ignoring all of that, which I think is an extraordinarily sad thing to have said. So when he talks about making a choice between funding refugees or funding the NHS, that's an extraordinary thing to do. It's a false polarity, it's not helpful, and in any case, many people in the NHS, working in the NHS, lived in other countries in the first place. He's not talking with facts, he's talking with prejudice, and I find that really upsetting.
You know, as a society, we make all sorts of decisions and we make all sorts of calculations about how we do trade-offs between X expenditure and Y expenditure. And I think it's disingenuous to say, well, if we didn't spend the money on the immigrants, we'd be spending it on the National Health Service. For all we know, we'd be spending it on arms, or we'd be spending it on you know, refurbishing some ministerial dwelling, or we'd be spending it on some other campaign or whatever. So to make a sort of one-to-one equivalent between a sort of humanitarian contribution, which is going to be short-term, you know, just a period of X number of years, certainly under 10, and likely under 5, to make a direct connection between that and expenditure on the NHS, I would say, is disingenuous.
Studies here in the United States have shown that the first generation of immigrants is a mild economic burden on the economy, but the second generation are contributing to the economy, contributing to economic growth. It's pretty striking in Europe, where actually the refugees are even needed economically. Europe has a declining population. It's going to need an influx of people to compensate for the decline.
Migrants generally contribute much more to advanced economies than they take out for several reasons. A, because they tend to be younger and healthier than the general population. B, because all the costs of their childhood education and, you know, early childhood have been borne by their own countries. They come already typically as young people, you know, ready to work. And C, because many migrants, including refugees, don't claim benefits that they might even be entitled to. Their families are still abroad and so on. So they're paying taxes, they're paying Social Security, but they're not claiming it. And some years ago, I think it was in 2013, United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, put out a report on migration, which, you know, you could maybe link to in your website, which shows the net value added of having large migrant populations.
Well, the Germans have become the conscience of Europe, and the Swedes. We're doing a little, but not as much as we should be doing.
What Angela Merkel did, by letting in 1 million refugees who are largely working age, who are largely willing to work, has been solve that economic problem for Germany. Not allowing in the refugees means everyone costs.
People have criticised the amendment that I put forward on the grounds that we haven't got the money to look after children here already, and therefore to have new ones is an extra financial burden. I think there is a financial difficulty, but I would argue that the government has been cutting back on a lot of public expenditure, including support for local authorities, and I don't think we should blame the refugees because the government has been cutting back. I argue that we're a rich enough country to do both.
Immigrants make previously struggling communities much more vibrant, good for small businesses, good for the economy, and actually there's certainly evidence in this country, in the US, that when there were large-scale deportations of undocumented migrants, some areas just collapsed because all the immigrant shops, all the businesses, all the kind of consumers were suddenly whisked away.
How many people have you met that have said, we need to think about refugees because many of them are just saving their daughters from being raped? Whereas most people put the conversation, how much is this costing us? What's the challenge going to be? But how many have said, wow, it fits the post-war retirement boom. We can put into our workforce all of these people that are ready, willing and able to work. No, what you actually hear is people saying they pinch our jobs. Why do they say they pinch our jobs? Because they read in some rubbishy newspaper, they pinch our jobs. Whereas every economic study shows that if you let refugees into your economy and allow them access to the workforce, they create at least 1.1 job for every refugee. In other words, for every 10 refugees that come into your economy, there are 11 new jobs. So they're not pinching your jobs, they're actually creating your jobs.